Today I'm standing inside the Cuban embassy here in Oslo in the prestigious embassy district of our city. And we're going to meet with the ambassador of Cuba to Norway, His Excellency Oscar de los Reyes. Now, if you look at the photos here, Fidel and Raul Castro, you'll understand that he comes from a different background than I do, but we have learned to understand each other and communicate very well. And I must say I dearly respect and honor this man. We're going to talk about vital issues between our nations, but also between Cuba and the rest of the world. I think this is going to be an intriguing and fascinating conversation. Ambassador, Your Excellency, Oscar de los Reyes, Ambassador of Cuba in Norway. The first time I recall that I met you was at a reception in, I believe, in the Russian embassy here. Or was it the Romanian? Romanian. And it struck me that your English is like an American. I had not expected that coming from Cuba. What's the reason for that, sir?
Well, there are a number of reasons. I attended a private school in Havana way before 1959, which was founded by the Anglican Church, Episcopal Church. And morning sessions were in English, and in the afternoon we took geography and history in Spanish. So I grew up practically bilingual. That's where the English comes from. Aside from the fact that later on in life, in Havana U, I took a master's in North American and English literature, which improved my English, at least the scope of my words, my choosing of language. But yes, the pronunciation was there since I was a little kid. And that stays on.
Exactly. Now, you are fully born Cuban.
Absolutely. Both my parents, both my grandparents, full-blooded Cuban, born and raised in the Republic of Cuba.
Is the majority of the population in Cuba today born in Cuba?
Oh yes, the vast majority of the population.
Well, how important is the pride of your nation for you and for your people?
Extremely important. We are noted for being a proud people.
Yeah.
That goes back to the origins of our nationality, of our identity.
Yeah.
We were a colony for close to 500 years of Spain. And once the national identity was established, an identity as Cubans, feeling for Cuba as their nation and not simply second-rate Spaniards. And the makeup of our nationality, coming mainly from Spain and from Africa, especially the west coast of Africa, through the horrible institution of slavery. That produced our brand of Cubans. And we fought for our national independence for decades. That made us a nation struggling to establish our full identity as a nation, an independent, sovereign nation. Unfortunately, the story that began in 1868 and then renewed in 1895 did not lead to full independence. We were occupied by the United States from 1899 to 1901. You know the story that came after that.
Of course.
And throughout the 20th century, it's always been a struggle to affirm our sense of identity, of independence and sovereignty. If these are reasons to feel proud.
I remember watching the Olympics and World Championships through the years, how the pride of the Cuban people when, I think his name was Sotomayor, set the world record in high jump.
Oh yes, he still holds that record.
Yeah, after many years actually.
More than 25.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure nobody has come closer than 2 centimeters from that record. But we've had in sports a number of outstanding sports women and men who have made us very proud, who've won extraordinary feats in track and field, in other team sports, and yes, that makes us very happy.
Yeah.
And we jump for joy whenever we get those medals.
Norway and Cuba has quite a history back. Tell me.
Well, we go back to 1909 when full relations were established. That has evolved along the years, from legation to the establishment of diplomatic missions, chargé d'affaires, and when you look back in history, we find defining moments. I was honored in May 2017. I got an invitation from the Minnehallen organization in the town of Stavern, a beautiful seaside town that has this monument dedicated to all sailors who fell in the world wars. And in May 2017, 4 new plaques of those seamen who had fallen at sea during the war were going to be inaugurated. And there was a Cuban, Jose Lino Ramos, a man from the city of Matanzas who joined the Norwegian ship Bonneville in New York in 1942. He was working as a galley boy, it's called, I understand, in the Bonneville. And the Bonneville was leaving New York to Liverpool in a convoy, as part of a convoy. But it was 9 March 1943, the Bonneville was hit by German U-boat torpedoes and sunk. And Lino Ramos went down with the ship. Since all the details, documents of the Norwegian Navy are so well kept, his registration with the Bonneville was found, and the organization of the Minnehallen was kind enough to include the name of Jose Lino Ramos among the 4 new plaques inaugurated in 2017 in Stavern. This is an element that brings us closer in history. A Cuban in 1943 being sunk in a Norwegian ship.
A Cuban gave his life for Norway.
A Cuban gave his life in the World War effort, bringing material support to Great Britain in 1943, but it was a Norwegian Navy under a Norwegian captain.
I noticed that there's even an established cooperation between nursing institutions in Norway and Cuba, so young people in Norway can have part of their training for health services in Cuba?
Well, it's Oslo Metropolitan. Oslo Met.
Oslo Met.
Oslo Met. They've had this program for some time now of nurses, men and women, taking courses in Cuba on a yearly basis for 4 to 5 months. They get an intense crash course in Spanish in their first month, and then they get practical studies and the experience in teaching hospitals, very especially in the eastern provinces of Cuba. This has been going on for some time now. I went there, I met the leaders of the medical school there, who thought very highly of the results of the program. But it's the young people, young students who've been there, who think even highly of that program. And we like it very much. The universities in Ciego de Ávila, in Camagüey, these are eastern provinces,
Yes.
have hold this program in very high regard. And we hope it flourishes, not only continues, but flourishes with more and more young people coming into contact on a daily basis in their professional lives. And they will always have that as a reference in their professional lives after that.
Exactly. Now, sir, it's interesting because, of course, from my viewpoint as a Pentecostal pastor, Fidel Castro does not come to my mind as one who would be open to faith. However, you have shared with me some intriguing developments between the Vatican and Fidel Castro, which paved the way for a greater maybe acceptance of faith, if I understand correctly, in Cuba today. Is that correctly observed?
It's an interesting observation. I'll tell you the following. Official relations between Cuba and the Vatican began in 1935.
Yes.
And have been there uninterruptedly to this day. Of course, the early 60s, the entire decade of the 60s, was a very difficult time. Relations were very tense, almost to the point of being frozen. But there was a persistence to finding ways and means of bringing back rationality to these relations. I must mention the work of an outstanding man of the cloth, Cesare Zacchi, who was there all along since the early 60s until as chargé d'affaires of the Vatican offices in Havana, until he was promoted to nuncio.
And a nuncio, of course, is the Vatican term for an ambassador.
Exactly. And he was a highly cultured man, a very skillful diplomat, who contributed to a new vision of the Church, of the Catholic Church in Cuba, and established good relations with many of our leaders, and very especially with Fidel Castro.
So the Catholic Nuncio and Fidel Castro, they had a special relationship.
They had a special relationship. He was in Cuba until 1974. And there was not only a thaw in the mutual relations, but something constructive came out of that. This has to do also with the atmosphere in Latin America. The conventions, Medellin, the bishops in Medellin,
yes,
and in Puebla, were very, very important for the new approach of not only the Vatican, but of many governments to the religious phenomena of very especially in Latin America. And of course, Cuba was also touched by that. 1989 marked the year of the first papal visit ever to Cuba. John Paul II, who had been invited personally by Fidel Castro 3 years early in '96, when he visited the Vatican and handed him the formal invitation. And it was a tremendous visit, tremendous, the outpour of the people. He was very welcome. And
it was well covered in international media.
Huge. Some were expecting other results other than what came out, which was a very solid understanding of our circumstances, our place in the world, and what religion, especially the Roman Catholic Church, had its effect in my country. I remember the day the Pope left, he had a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Big rain, dark clouds, started raining at the airport, and he said in his quiet, melodious voice, "The sky is crying because the Pope has to leave." Then 14 years later, we had Benedictus. He offered masses in the capital and in Santiago, I think, also. And Francis, who came for his first visit to Cuba in 2011. And the next year, he had a stopover of 2 days in Havana. He was en route to Mexico and stopped to meet with the leader of the Russian Orthodox Church for a meeting and an agreement that hadn't happened in 1,000 years. Mm-hmm. So these have been the highlights of our relations with the Vatican. And it continues. It continues.
Doesn't this speak volumes about the miracle power in excellent diplomacy?
And a will to understand, mm-hmm. and a will to find things that bring you closer, not apart. Success is there. If you're able to identify those areas, those topics that bring you close together, then that is the path to success in human contacts.
Exactly.
And on this scale, nation to nation, it is essential.
Yes. Sir, I have friends who work closely with the Pentecostal churches in Cuba, and they tell me about thriving development in so many other churches. And I noticed that quite recently the Roman Catholic Church has built new cathedrals in Cuba. So actually, if I understand correctly, the role of faith is quite freely expressed in Cuba today.
Yes, the freedom of worship, of creed, is consecrated in our Constitution. And there are a number of religions that conduct their day-to-day work freely and with full confidence. Catholic, Protestants, rites of African origin,
yeah.
The Jewish community, very small one.
Yeah.
They can conduct their worship and their activities with total freedom. As I said, it's enshrined in the Constitution. And I would say more. The majority of the population, if we take baptism as being the essential requirement for being Christian, the vast majority of those who are 60 or older were baptized.
Yeah.
I don't have a figure for how many baptisms are conducted today, but we can say that the population of Cuba is mostly Christian. Now, Catholics, Protestant denominations, that's a different story. I venture to say that most hold the Roman Catholic believe as the majority of those churchgoers, of those who are churchgoers, respect and honor. Many are believers, but are not exactly churchgoers. They don't follow precepts that closely, but they are still believers. And then the ecumenical religions, and we have Presbyterian, Baptists, Anglican, Methodists.
And a lot of Pentecostals.
And Pentecostals.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, lastly, Your Excellency, my wife and I have had the privilege of visiting your home, and a delightful time. Food, and your wife is such a warm person. But family seems to be a high value in the Cuban society. Would you just tell me about that?
We believe that family is the core element, the cell of every society. We have a family code. Cuba also was the first to subscribe the UN resolution against all forms of discrimination against women. And that ranks very highly in our list of requirements for society. It is through, yes, education, which is free for all from cradle to grave in Cuba, has a lot to do with formation of younger generations of kids. But it's in the family, in the solid family cell, that everything is nurtured and protected to move on to form people, men and women, useful to society with the ideas of improvement in society. So yes, we value it very highly. And we believe, and I personally believe, in the redemption of ignorance, redemption from ignorance in our society, and it's through education. And the best education you can get, it's not only what you get in schools, from teachers, from the official setup of the training and education in my country, but through the family, the values that young people receive, the human contact with their parents. That is essential, and we are firm believers in that.
You speak like an evangelical pastor, sir. Well,
if I can bring anyone into these ideas, I would be very pleased. I don't have to preach to the converts with you.
Well, thank you so much, Your Excellency, and I pray and hope that you will have a long term in Norway as yet.
I'm into my 4th year. I don't think I will stay much longer than that, but I can tell you that I've enjoyed every minute of it, and it has, as your official national anthem very recently approved, Jag älskar detta landet. I've grown to love the place, and it's the satisfaction that this métier of diplomacy gives us, the possibility of getting to know other nations, other peoples, find out what they like, dislike, what makes them function, and to exchange person to person, to touch the hand of people. That is indispensable, and it's a treasure that we diplomats get to enjoy.
Thank you, sir.
More than welcome.
Thank you so much.